A mentor once told me that we are only protectors of the things that we truly love. Now, one of the tenets of social entrepreneurship is stewardship of people and the planet while also being able to turn a profit. I was recently introduced to a couple that have started a business that has its foundations grounded in this love. New Mexico is where I connected with the founders and operators of Bidii Baby Foods. Although their farm is in Shiprock, I met Mary and Zach Ben at their home in Gallup to find out more about their organically grown, Navajo-owned baby food company. As their vision and mission statements read, we envision a community where traditional indigenous foods are plentiful and accessible in early childhood and beyond. Our mission is to reconnect indigenous families with our long-standing relationship between earth and parenting. We believe that there is a direct connection between nurturing the land and nurturing our children. By understanding how to grow traditional crops and preparing them for young children, we are actively dismantling systems of oppression and rebuilding indigenous foodways. Welcome to another episode of Ripple on the Road. I am Mike Shodroff. I am the founder and CEO of the Ripple Center, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization who believes that industry has a lot to do with our social and environmental issues that we face today. And ultimately, our goal is to help promote, to create, to educate, to inspire individuals to recognize, make all the profit you want, but not necessarily at the expense of people and the planet. And that brings me here today to Gallup, New Mexico, where I am with Mary and Zach Ben, who are the founders of Bidii Baby Foods. And, how would I in Navajo say welcome or thank you?
Yeah, you would just say yate. So yate, everybody. Yate. To meet you, and thank you so much.
Thank you. So could you do me a favor, tell me a little bit about, how did you get started? What does the name mean? Just some background information, perhaps even about the two of you.
Yeah. Well, my name is Zachariah Ben. So Yate, Nana. Again, I was born and raised in Shiprock, New Mexico. I am a 6th generation farmer, and our son is a 7th generation farmer. So that's just a little bit about who I am and my background. And this is my partner and mom for Yavi, Mary.
Yeah, and I'm originally from Baltimore, but been out here close to a decade now. My background is in public health. I did Peace Corps in Ethiopia, which is what started me in farming, because by default, I had to grow my own foods living in a really rural community. But then also, realized and appreciated the value that brought, not only to my health, but the sustainability of the community I was living in. So ever since that point, when I moved back, I always wanted to kind of volunteer on local farms, which when I came out to New Mexico, that's how I met Zach. I actually met his family before I met him, volunteering with his farm. And then ever since, when we started our family, we really wanted, our son to have access to organic and locally grown foods. So it really our mission started out of our own, developing our family and just wanting to have those foods for him. And we figured, well, this is something that we didn't have access to when we had him. And I'm sure there's other people in our community that would like to access that too.
Can you tell us a little bit about the name?
Bidii Baby Foods. Bidii in Navajo is somebody who is always snacking, or you see that person going up for seconds, and it's oh, they're really bitty. They're going up for thirds again, and so it's just more like a saying. And so Bidii Baby, and that's kind of how our son was when he was breastfeeding, and then from there getting into his solid foods, and he wanted what we wanted. And that was something that was very intriguing for myself to oh wow, he really wants our food, he wants to interact and engage with what we're eating, and mom cooking, he wants to be up there and checking it out, trying to understand how that food gets there in the first place. And that's just the Bidii Baby. So our son is the Bidii Baby, just kind of how we are all Bidii Baby and foods. So That's what we provide. So Bidii Baby Foods for all the biddies out there.
Wow. Now, could you tell our audience, for those that don't know, a little bit about Navajo Nation and what life is like?
Wow. Well,
I know that's a big loaded question.
I think in summary, we are the size of, I believe, West Virginia was the size, considered the size of the state. For us, Navajo Nation is a reservation that was, for us as agricultural producers, we hold land use permits. And so from there, when you really technically look at it, we don't own any of our land. The federal government does, but they lease it to us. And so with that, it brings up a lot of challenges, unfortunately, of being able to establish business sites, business development sites, even creating assets, which we don't claim. We cannot claim the land as an asset. We cannot claim structures that are built on there for distribution or manufacturing. Those are not considered assets because then they are part of the land. And so there's many barriers in those ways of understanding how to navigate that red tape, and especially being able to understand, and for myself, the narrative of what it means to use those natural resources that surround us and that we do have access to as a land use permit holder or a leasee of that federal land. For example, the farm. You got the land and you got the water. So how do you navigate into saying I need land, I need water, to not just be an individual farmer, not even considering developing a business. And so for myself growing up, that's all I understood was a cash crop. A cash crop of being able to build a farm that eventually during the fall and then the winter, it'll provide for you. And so understanding that and moving into the area of realizing that, we have a lot of food health elements that are related to what is provided to us, our food access, which is very low. So you're either looking at a gas station that provides processed and preserved foods, whether it be canning or bagged, like Frito-Lays, Hot Cheetos. And so you have that access, and that's 30 minutes out of the way. Or you can go to the grocery store, which is in a major town, which is an hour plus away. And even then, some of the produce nowadays are unfortunately spoiling right in the fridges, and that's what we have access to. So they would rather market Hot Cheetos and fast foods and processed meats like bologna, Spam at the beginning of the store, and have people go out and use that as a means of nutrition. And so I grew up also in that mindset. Even though we were farmers, I grew up just go to the point where you only had $10 to last for the week as a family of 6. And you have dogs to feed, you have yourselves to feed, underdeveloped home. And so what do you do with $10? You're going to have to buy that processed and preserved food because that's all you have access to. You don't have gas money or transportation to go into a border town. And so that is the narrative that a lot of families face of, and I think, being able to understand that and combat that now as I have grown older out of that experience, and being able to have our son not necessarily survive, but more so thriving in that environment. And so this was the way of us as parents to being able to provide him that intergenerational wealth of building that up. And again, there's so much more that goes into what it means to live and to see the Navajo Nation. But I think those are the environments that we want to change for the betterment of his future and his siblings' future and his family's future. So that's what we're looking forward to. We've learned from our past, we're going to work on it now. We're here in the present, and we're going to build something better for the future for our children's children and the generations to come.
It's one thing, right? What you're saying is, you want to create a better future for your children and their children to grow the food and provide it to them. But then to turn it into a business is a whole other step. How did that come about? How did it go from, hey, we're going to provide healthy food for Yabi, our son, versus let's provide healthy food for others as well? How did that transition or happen?
I mean, it became pretty clear early on when we first had him. I think we were growing 2-3 acres just for ourselves, knowing like we had him in March. By harvest time, he's going to be at 6 months. That's usually when they start transitioning to foods. And so we planted a bigger variety of crops that year too, knowing like his different nutritional needs. But once we realized, like other parents saw what we were doing, other parents our age with young children, and they were asking, how could they get some? And we started looking into like, how could we, get this into other families' hands? How can that be affordable for them too? Because a lot of times organic foods or dehydrated and processed foods like what we're doing is, our products are $10 to $20 a bag. And that's, like Zach said, if you only have $10 for the week, are you going to buy this one bag of Nishjiji, or are you going to buy Spam and potatoes and, things that are going to last longer? So we realized that if we wanted to have that bigger impact, we would need to scale. We needed to find a bigger plot of land. So we've scaled from 2 acres to 16 acres now. And then we also registered an LLC, an agricultural cooperative, with the Navajo Nation. And then even further beyond that, we realized, loans are really not a great option for us, or really for a lot of folks who have grown up with like not much, right? In our community across Navajo Nation, the average family household income is usually less than $20,000 a year for an entire family. And so if you're gonna like immediately apply for $100,000-$200,000 loan to support your farm, like it's not going to be profitable within the amount of time that loans usually give you. Plus there's high interest rates. We knew we needed grants to be able to scale that 16 acres, like with the infrastructure. And we also knew that, like part of our mission, like we work on both supply and demand. So we needed to build our supply as a business. But because people in our community have, systematically had these foods taken away from them in a very intentional way from the government. Like Zach said, even the way he grew up, he's a farmer. He's very aware of like, we can grow these foods and we have access to them, but it was mostly a source of income for his family to export to other, like to border towns or to other places. Like if we're going to work on the demand side, if we need community to better understand the value of these foods, and we need to get certified ourselves so that we can accept WIC and SNAP and EBT and these forms of payment that really help people to be able to afford and reconnect with their foods. We also need a 501c3 to be able to get grants to build up both sides simultaneously rather than one side with the other side lagging. Yeah.
Can you talk about the farm itself in Shiprock? You talk about traditional indigenous foods that you're growing there, sustainable and organic practices. What are the foods that you're growing? What are the traditions that were passed down to you, Zach, and how are they used for the business today?
Yeah, well, in terms of the farm, I think for me, again, I think it was instilled into me at a very young age that you have to utilize the land and always give that back as well. What you take, you give back. And so for me, growing up with that, I guess, foundation of understanding and building that relationship with the land and the resources that surround it, of how to establish a farm. And so with that, my family and I, we produce Navajo Indian white corn. And so from there, it goes through an added value process, and it turns into an added value product. And so these are methods that have been, practiced for a very long time. These are primitive ways of being able to add value to your crop, but not only that, having it being able to, in a way, be preserved through wintertime. Because if you take fresh Indian white corn and then you start, trying to store it, and then it's going to spoil, those were things that our ancestors learned how to not only just preserve it, but add value while preserving it. So that process is taking the Navajo Indian white corn during harvest, and we'll put it into a burning pit. It's a 10-foot deep by 4-foot wide steam pit underground. And so we use the bedrock and the soil itself to retain heat. And so when we build a fire in the morning, we'll let that burn all day. And then we'll keep adding fuel to that, which is can be anywhere from like cotton trees to pinon, cedar, different organic fuels in that way. And so at the end of the day, after we have collected all of our corn off the fields, we have anywhere from a truckload to 2 truckloads. And it depends on each section that we tap into. Okay. So one section of a good acre could be around like 10 truckloads, 10 to 8 truckloads is what you're looking at there. And so with that, we'll take that back into the steam pit. We'll dump it into the steam pit. We'll lay a layer of mud there, and that acts as an adhesive where we'll then add a plywood, a non-chemically treated plywood, a little hole at the top of that, and it turns into a lid. So the hole in that plywood serves as a spout that we can then add water into, another layer of mud, and another plywood, and then completely seal it with weights. Sandbags is what we use. But so that is one of the first pressure cookers. And so it's one of the fresh, and so with that, when you let that steam for 12 hours straight, so if we put it in at 8 p.m., we'll come back at 8 a.m. the next day, the next morning. And so from there, we'll take off all the weights, we'll open up the boards, scoop off the mud, and then you have a hot steaming pit of steamed corn. And so from there, we'll jump into that pit, and it's very hot. It's like you're looking at anywhere from 100 and 120 degrees in steam and heat. On the outside of that, we'll have a crew on top dehusking the corn, and then we'll load that up. We'll take it to drying racks where that'll dehydrate for a day to anywhere from 2 days up to 5 days, depending on how hot and how much cloud coverage we get or the sunny days that we have. And so that's an added value process. And then once that dehydrates, we'll go through shucking and taking off the kernels off the cobs, winnow it, getting out the excess flakes and excess cobs. And from there you have kernels that you can then rehydrate through stew. And so that practice again has been done since our ancestors learned how to, of course, genetically nurture these corns into the way they are today that we use, and then being able to understand of how to add value. And then and so that is the product itself of nishiji is what we call that. And so you can also enjoy it freshly out of the steam pit, which you call that sleshebej. And so sleshebej is like the fresh out of the earth corn. So it's cooked by the earth is what it's basically the translation. And then neshiji is Navajo dried steam corn. And that's where we would then take that, those kernels, we'll take it to a commercial kitchen, and then from there we'll mill that down into Bidii Baby Foods. And that's where it turns into like a grits or like a cereal that you can then again rehydrate or and add that into purees for children, or add expressed breast milk to that. So that in itself is the product of how we were able to bridge that gap of like, okay, this is a whole kernel, babies can't enjoy this obviously. We could boil it, we could mash it down and puree it, but even then that's a lot of work. And so we thought, why don't we skip that process of mashing it after you boil it? And so my wife here, she decided that, she started experimenting with these recipes when our son started yearning for more of our table food. And so, I just think that was a wonderful way to understand that that's the manufacturing part of that added value process. But what goes into it is, the physical labor of being able to understand your physical parts of yourselves to push it when not to push it. And for myself, growing up, I just understood that process as oh, this is going to provide money for us. But now having this relationship, and now having our relationship with our son, and having that that love ultimately take over into, okay, you're providing for your family by farming with them and getting them involved in that process that is slowly receding, that those things are going back into the older ways. And how do we keep that afoot, and how do we keep that here? And so it starts with the farm, and we feel that is a foundation of being able to continue to create these cultural repositories of our children, and instilling that knowledge into them, and having them partake in that process, not talk about it, not vocalize it, but to actually be a part of that process. And so when you're a part of that process, you ritualize it. And so that's where that relationship of synchronizing yourself with your surroundings and your intake comes into play. And so it becomes a healing journey. And so, for us, when you're using our first foods to be able to feed that to your children, you're feeding them more than love. You're feeding them that healing. You're feeding them that practice that has been ritualized for generations. And that's the type of, practices that we use within our fields. And that also prevents us from introducing chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, non-GMO, because again, we're going by the traditional practice, and we're going by that traditional route of, this is how we can work with the land, understand it. There's too many weeds in this section. Why don't we, focus here and understand that we need more, work here, more manpower here than here. Over here, we have too many bugs. Oh, well, we're going to have to do some, some herbs or some tobacco in this section to deter them away from that area. And so those are kind of like the natural remedies that we are able to problem solve in the moments that we get to understand that relationship to the land. And so, utilizing our brain power to, understand that, that's what we want to show our son. That's what we want to teach him. So those are our farming practices in summary.
Just a quick add-on too. I think that right now, especially, there seems like regenerative agriculture seems to be like a sexy term that's being thrown around a lot. But it's really just a new way of saying what these old practices were. And, even though we've kind of scaled up in acreage, our goal as a cooperative is not just, to keep scaling forever. We've actually kind of decided that the amount of land we have now is good for us, and that the goal is to not get more and more acreage for ourselves, but to, mentor other farmers who can, create their own businesses or be part of our cooperative and sell under us, and kind of use the similar types of practices, which are inherently regenerative, right? Like we're no-till. We don't use pesticides or herbicides or fertilizers. We do kind of crop rotation to help. Like corn is it pulls a lot from the soil. So every couple of years we'll rotate that with like alfalfa or, other crops that will instill, nutrients back in. We also kind of cut things down and burn them in certain areas, because burning will help add nitrogen. And then, we, like Zach said, if we do notice problem areas, we get lots of weeds. It's not like we just have the best technique and we have no weeds, we have a ton. And a lot of it's addressed by hand. So even though we've scaled up and we have received grants, we've decided to actually not use those grants for heavy machinery. Our life could be a lot easier if we owned our own tractor and if we owned like a corn husker or a corn picker. But we also see the value in doing these things by hand. Last year we planted 10 acres of the 16 completely by hand. We also pick all the corn by hand. As Zach was mentioning earlier, we husk and process everything by hand. And there's something about those methods that were done intentionally that way. It's not out of lack of, access to these, resources that could make save us some time. But it's not always about saving time. It's about getting your hands dirty. And for our son, we have him there with us because him interacting with the soil and the water is helping his immune system for us to stay active. And that was really important for us, especially postpartum, just to like keep ourselves physically and mentally healthy and strong. If we just hopped on a tractor and did everything, we wouldn't have had, like, it's giving us something also to do it that way.
So what's really great that I'm hearing, and I'm hearing so many wonderful things right now, a few things that come to mind is this idea that, and, I've been saying it for a long time, that spirituality and science sometimes are, connected, right? You have this complete respect and understanding for your relationship with the earth, right? The traditions that you've been given. You're doing this out of love for your child. You're seeing food as medicine, not just the end product, but the process. With all of that, and you said, no pesticides and, all of the practices. I mean, you are right now defining, impact entrepreneurship. Yet you are up against certain things like, for example, the junk food tax. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to go on a tangent. I don't remember what year, but a few years back, Navajo Nation established the junk food tax. I think it's actually called the Healthy Bidii Nation Act. And it was really in partnership. I think, some folks from the nonprofit sector partnered with Harvard, and they basically wrote and proposed this bill, and it was accepted by Navajo Nation. And, the concept behind it is that if you apply a tax to junk foods, it will deter people from wanting to purchase those foods.
Even though you were saying that in a food desert, that's the only food you have access to.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the money that was supposed to be gathered from that junk food tax, there have been some studies done recently that show stores are not reporting or submitting those taxes regularly, or not applying the taxes correctly. The money is then distributed amongst all the chapters across Navajo Nation, and local farms or groups in those communities are supposed to be able to go to their chapter and ask for funding to support what they're doing, and it just doesn't work that way for a number of reasons, like you said, because where we are, we're in Kadiai, which is about 20 minutes from Shiprock. But if you drive down that road, people along that way, like there's one trading post in Tisnaspas, there's one gas station, and other than that, they have to come to Shiprock. There's one grocery store, and if you go there and you look at the produce, it's usually moldy by the time it's there, with the exception of like oranges and apples and potatoes. But like if you want berries and things like that, it's not good quality. So then most of the time people are actually going to Farmington. So it's a good, on average, 50 to 60 miles one direction to access produce. And so for those folks along the road that are going to a trading post or going to a gas station, and there is no produce, like their only options are processed foods, you're basically taxing people that have no choice. It's not working the way that it was intended to, and quite honestly, I don't think from a public health standpoint, I don't think that in other communities outside of Navajo Nation, I don't think junk food taxes have been shown to be very impactful anyway on consumer choice. It's more about availability and affordability and accessibility.
So with that, what are some of the successes you've seen, the stories you've heard, the inspirations, because I'm excited hearing this. How do these things spread? What are some of the feedback you've gotten, or just successes you've seen?
Well, the stories, I think in terms of stories, for example, that the Bidii Baby Foods cereal, Nishiji Butkatni, the original one, that one is very versatile. You can use it in your everyday recipes as well. Mary has made us meatloaf out of some of that, and as besides adding a flour, you're adding the Bidii Baby Foods in there. And so from there, she has made macarons with it. And so, and so it's been amazing of being able to, enjoy our product as well, and again, feeding it to our son.
A lot of elders eat it, not just babies, because sometimes like the way that the whole corn would be consumed is with mutton and Plus, the corn is really hard to eat. So we've had a lot of elders want to take like mutton broth and make it with the pureed nishiji. They get all the flavor, but they don't have, you know, the barrier of like it hurting their teeth. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the elder that came up to me, he was like, Shiaji, you know, thank you for providing this. You know, I would rather much prefer, because I grew up with my grandpa, you know, with this, they call it athbai, the coffee creamer. And so I would prefer this because I'm diabetic. So I would prefer this over going to Walmart and buying Nestle and putting more sugar, even though it says no sugar in there. I don't trust those. I don't trust what they say. So I trust this because I know I've been here. I've worked on the farm. My grandpa taught me this foods, and so, you know, being able to understand that, and, you know, the moms that come through, you know, like, and the dads too, you know, like, oh, where's your farm, and, you know, where can we go, and it eventually creates this space and this site where families can come and become involved in this process, more than just saying, this is Bidii Baby Foods, buy here. You know, it's more than that, and we let that be known when we have those interactions there.
No, I mean, it's great. Like, we've had people see our sign at the farmers market and like pull a screeching, you know, U-turn to come back, and they've shared that with us. And those one-on-one interactions with families are obviously so meaningful. But starting this business has also forced us to think on a more systems level. And again, because our area has such, you know, socioeconomic like challenges, almost everybody in our community qualifies for the school lunch program, right, through their schools. And we recognized as we were scaling up last year that if we do want to have the biggest impact and get it into the most bellies, we need to combat these systems level challenges for small and mid-scale farmers, which is to become farm to school certified, and to get like WIC and SNAP EBT certifications, so we can accept those forms of payment. That is what's gonna, you know, really reach the demographic of people that we're trying to reach the most. If we're having like an equity focus on who's, you know, able to access these foods. So while we don't all the time get those, you know, individual stories, we have been invited when we did a few farm to school events to, like, we got invited to go to a preschool and sit down with the kids and watch them eat it and answer questions, speak to teachers, school administrators. And so to know that, you know, our foods this past year were able to reach over 6,000 students is great. We don't have 6,000 individual stories, but we know that just from, you know, going and visiting and knowing that right now we're one of 2 farms on Navajo Nation on this side, on New Mexico side, that's farm to school certified, and really the only one doing anything to scale like that. We feel honor, but also pressure to continue to maintain that and even, you know, bring more farmers into our cooperative so we can grow that number. Yeah.
Any final thoughts, you know, hopes, wishes, what you see down the road for Bidii Baby Foods?
Yeah, I think, like, overall, whenever you start a business, you're not just being seen for what you put out on your website, like Zach said, in a very small community. People see you outside of that space, and it's important that you live the lifestyle and practice what you preach all the time. So people will see you, like, you know, and it's not to say that we never eat non-traditional foods, right? Like, we're never gonna not be seen at, like, getting pizza or something. Like, that's gonna happen. But just living a really authentic lifestyle and sharing, and really, like, I don't know, there's a lot of people that might say that they're into X, Y, and Z, but then you look at their children and they don't, like, know what you're talking about, right? And so I think we try to live that motto of, like, you know, if we talk about the importance of farming, or we talk about the importance of traditional foods, when we put mutton stew in front of our son right now, he will devour it, because those were the foods that he was first introduced to, and he genuinely loves them, and he would prefer them over, like, and this has happened. We went to a conference and there was like Mishiji stew in front of him, and then also like cookies and stuff, and he's just like, no cookies, focused on the stew, right? So like the actions of your children should also kind of reflect like you and how your family like lives. It should just be a normal lifestyle, and it's something people will be watching like all the time. It doesn't matter if you're like got your business hat on and you're like on your 9 to 5, like people are gonna see what you're doing and see what you're eating, and yeah, so being authentic and having it really be a part of your lifestyle is important too.
Well, we definitely see a lot, and I think those are some of the things that continue to push us into that direction, because ultimately, you know, we are building a company that is not only providing the food access or these options or these resources directly back into our community by the community, but it's being able to understand that if we can change the environment for our son, then we are changing the environment for others that surround him and his peers. And so it's a mutually beneficial company. And with that, it turns into a social entrepreneurship. It's not for an individual gain. We're not in it to commercialize our products or ourselves or go through that route.
Or industrialize.
Yeah. By starting Bidii Baby Foods, by increasing not only the access, but the options. The options, and not only the options of like, oh, there's a product here, we take cash. No, it's like, we have a product here, you can either go through Wick, Snap, or cash, or online. And online has been a huge thing, because you have people all over the world. You have Navajo people all over the world, you have Indigenous people all over the world. If you really look at it, without the borders, we're all Indigenous people. We all need this type of food. And that's where, again, we feel like we're not only bridging that gap by increasing that option, but we are also reestablishing our first foods for everyone. And I say everyone because what do we all have here? We all have 5 fingers. We're Bilashklai. We're the people that live between the land and the sky. So with that, we should take care of each other. And when we see moldy produce coming to our doors, we're not caring for each other. And so that's where, we want to, we care for our son enough to understand his reaction to those first foods. And that's the type of reaction we want for the rest of our people. And I say people not just in the borders of the Navajo Nation, I say our people across the world, because we are yearning for that. We need that.
Well said.